With Yachting New Zealand based in Takapuna, it will also deliver roughly a further $2 million into the local economy. We do not run events. A facility of this significance will be amazing and create enormous opportunities while gaining international recognition for Takapuna, for North Shore and New Zealand, and should be and will be something the community can be proud of. I would like to just finish up by saying that the Community Hub is fully funded. It will open up all of the Northern Reserve, creating community space and meeting facilities, as well as incorporating a much-needed high-performance centre.
Thank you, Mr Abercrombie. That is time, but there are questions that want to be asked. Member Cohen, in relation to your personal statement, we'll make that once we get past questions. I'll allow you to make that after we've got past questions. So if we could just have questions first, and then when the motion's moved, I'll let you make a personal statement relating to the statements that were made there. So are there any questions? Member Gillen, questions of Mr Abercrombie.
Thank you, Mr Abercrombie. You made the comment that some unreasonable restrictions were placed on you in joining the working group. Can you just explain what those unreasonable restrictions were? Yes,
Member Cohen at the time said that we were unable to share our plans with anyone outside the working group, and he requested that we not progress our resource consent application at that time until those meetings had finished. And that is not something we could have agreed to, both from Yachting New Zealand's perspective and Harbour Access Trust.
So were there any reasons given for that restriction?
Not that we could agree to or understand.
Right.
So we felt that the need to have Yachting New Zealand and Harbour Access Trust at the table, being able to share what we were proposing, was more important than that group deciding that we were unable to share that with the public, and that was the request that was made of us.
So if the working party got together to talk about the best way forward on this, but one party continued to push their own particular angle, would that not be a breach of good faith for the working party, do you think?
I'm not sure that that would have occurred.
Okay. Any further questions? Questions from Member O'Connor.
Now, you say there's between 12 and 25 high-performance sailors, and so we need a hard stand for up to 25 yachts?
Correct.
And you say that they're out of the country 150 days a year?
It varies depending on the classes and the number of events internationally, year on year.
Oh, I don't know who I heard on the radio being interviewed some months ago now on the Tony Beach program, two high-performance sailors saying they're only in Auckland 4 months of the year, so I'm not quite sure who they were. Would you dispute that they're only here 4 months of the year?
There are some athletes who, depending on, and so at this time of the year at the moment, there are European Championships, World Championships, and Olympic test events that only occur in cycle once every 4 years. So there is a test event in the year prior to the Olympics, and over those periods, some of those athletes may well spend that amount of time overseas. Others won't. Others will return from events. Others will go to particular training facilities.
And yet we need officers there for 5 full-time coaches on the reserve.
The officers are not just for full-time coaches. The idea of having a high-performance centre is to provide opportunities for young New Zealanders to perform on the world stage to the maximum of their ability, and that cycles year in, year out, and a requirement to have a facility like that is very important. The fact that some athletes spend longer away from New Zealand than at other times would be represented by the size of the building that we are proposing, but I don't believe your argument's valid.
I deny guidance.
No. Questions only, Member O'Connor. There is a supplementary question. Well, I'll just check if there are any other questions first. No? Okay, then yes, final question, Member Gillen.
Thank you. It's just the arrangements of Yachting New Zealand fascinate me. I had a gentleman from a South Island club, the club's a member of Yachting New Zealand, speak to me last night, actually, just coincidentally. He complained, and we didn't actually talk about this issue, but it was forthcoming. He complained that their club and their athletes want to partake in regattas, but they're forced by Yachting New Zealand to come to Auckland to partake in regattas. If they don't come to Auckland, then they're not chosen as part of the national team. And yet the South Island, I think it was Otago somewhere, felt that they had plenty of places for a centre such as you're proposing here, and also for regattas down there, and that it was unfair on the young sailors in the South Island to be forced to come up north instead of holding
So you're asking if
regattas
that
down
is
there.
true?
So I'm just asking, whether that's correct or not, or whether...
No, that's not factual.
So how does that actually work? How does the selection on the regattas?
Not that I think it's pertinent to this discussion, but the selection process for young athletes is they're identified around the country. 80% of the athletes live in Auckland. Some of the youth athletes are part of a fast-track program. That fast-track program operates around 7 to 9 different training events around New Zealand. We don't run regattas, as stated previously, so where your member thought we ran regattas, I don't know. And for the major regatta in Auckland, called the Ocean Bridge Sail Auckland Regatta, athletes out of Auckland get a travel allowance to help them get to Auckland. So we recognise that you can't have facilities spread all around in New Zealand, and in order to minimise the cost, you place a facility in an area where the majority of your athletes reside.
Sorry, I realised that Member Rowe, I didn't see your hand before, so a question from Member Rowe.
Yes, because we weren't really privy to the new design that was proposed after the first one, which was rejected, partly because of you not being involved in the working party, but only came out very soon before the public feedback session. Can you explain how the roof, the grass roof, works as reserve space? Because a lot of people have been saying, it wouldn't work, and it would be dead in the summer and one thing and another. And I've done a wee bit of homework on that sort of thing myself, and I see that there are quite a few examples from around the world. So I'm just wondering, could you explain that to people?
The roof of the facility is a mixture of grass, concrete, timber. It has been beautifully designed by Boffa Miskell and Rachel de Lambert. The grass surface is very similar to that is on the Lincoln Centre in New York, and if anyone's seen that, you'll see that it survives very nicely and it operates brilliantly as a public reserve in the middle of a city. We have no concerns over maintaining that facility and our facility in that sort of condition.
Okay, so with no further questions, I'm going to put the motion and allow, if I've got a seconder, Member Hale, then Member Cohen, you indicated you'd like to make a personal statement, so you can do so now as part of the debate.
Perhaps just to clarify, my style is always to be inclusive, and it's always beneficial to have everybody in the tent if you actually want to arrive at a solution. And so I do take a little bit of umbrance of what Mr. Abercrombie is saying, is that at the last initiated meeting by the Minister, it was agreed that we needed to go forward with some sort of mechanism to bring the parties together, and that was on the understanding, supported by the representative from the HATS Trust at that meeting, that we would work on the basis, and this was really quite critical, was that all members would work with one another in good faith. And that's really critical. If you're going to make any progress, it's got to be in good faith, and that no party would take any unilateral action. Otherwise, how are you going to actually work together if one of the parties feels free to just go off on a particular tangent? The idea also was to have it short and sharp so that we could arrive at what I was aiming for was some sort of end result by sometime in December at the latest. So it did mean a potential delay from HAT's point of view between September and December. But given the controversy surrounding this Northern Activity Zone, that seemed to be a small price to pay if we could actually nut out something that would actually work for all parties. And so I'm rather disappointed that it's been suggested that I actually made it impossible for them to participate. I don't believe that's the case at all.
Right, so you've made that statement. My only further comment would be that I was also involved in that process for the meetings that were given reasonable notice to members to attend. And I also recall the resolutions that were made by the board of what the objectives of the working party were set to do. Member Cohen and other members. The objectives were fairly clear, I thought, in the sense that the objective of the working party was to form or to draft a new concept plan, which would then go out for consultation, to decide on the parameters of any potential self-contained motorhome accommodation that could be accommodated on the site, to also determine any parameters for any community use and high-performance sporting facility on the location, and also to discuss how and if it was possible to increase public access from the current lack of. And that's my recollection of the resolutions, and I double-checked them before I came in here. So I also recall turning up to the meeting, and I was admittedly a little bit late, but there was a kind of run between multiple meetings, and it was presented to the working party, not debated with the working party, as far as my recollection is, whether or not the chair was comfortable with the Yachting New Zealand or Harbour Access Trust or Sport New Zealand, I think potentially were one of the parties considered, should be involved in that. But obviously this has been a controversial issue for the board when suggestions and amendments were put up at the time saying that perhaps the current operators of the campground were not the best people to have in that working party, and that a more general perspective of the caravan members or associations of New Zealand or some other such association. I know that was not necessarily adopted by the full board. So I think it's just important that we keep in mind that the process has occurred. It may or may not have succeeded in its objectives. One way or another, it presented to the board the 4 options, and the board decided to go out on that process, and that's what we're here to discuss today. We have to accept as a board any flaws in that process, because we ultimately as a collective board resolved to do what we resolved to do. So that's my speaking turn. If there are any further members, there are not, so I'll put the motion as it sits. All those in favour say aye. Contrary, carried. So that closes deputations and brings us to item 8, public forum. So members, we have 12 members of the public who wish to speak, and I have an order here. Just to emphasise again, so that there's no uncertainty, comments are to be directed at the board through the chair, and also the time restrictions are 3 minutes for a presentation, and that is supposed to include question time. So I ask that you please stick as closely as possible. Also, please try and present information from your point of view and for the board to use, and not please try not to be repetitive. So with that in mind, Mr. Maidment, John Maidment, is the first presenter I have on my list. Yes, okay. The lectern is the ideal location. And if you could, your 3 minutes starts when you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board and the public. First of all, I'd just like to read out the statement that I've put on the board here, which comes as fundamental as to why we're here tonight. Why should the public need to be fighting to save something they want and that already exists from being destroyed and replaced by something they clearly don't want and that does not exist? Before I start my presentation, I know I haven't got long, but I was asked to actually communicate the following document on behalf of the Safe Takapuna Beach Holiday Park and a member that couldn't be here tonight. It reads, we have obtained 2 legal opinions on the HAT Yachting New Zealand proposal to establish their development on the public reserve. Both opinions were obtained independently. Can everybody hear? Yeah. Good. Independently of each other, and without a second lawyer knowing the conclusions been reached by the first. Both opinions concluded that the council has no statutory power under the Reserves Act to allow the erection and leasing of the building, nor the leasing of the hard stand areas. These conclusions apply not just to some of the functions within the building, but to the entire building and its use.